This is Manu Parpia and Startup Diaries. This is a series of podcasts in which I will talk to some entrepreneurs to see how they face the problems and what lessons can be learned by other entrepreneurs who face the problems of starting up, of scaling up, of exiting, and so on. I hope you enjoyed the series and I look forward to receiving your comments. We will start with a chat with Syed Hidayatullah, who used to be the CEO, founder and CEO of a startup called Smokescreen in software security area. And Syed and I work together. And let me start off, so with that, I'll introduce Syed.
Thanks, Manu. Nice to be here. And I really like this initiative. So happy to have a chat and looking forward to doing more of these.
Yes, let's see how people find them useful or not. So the first question I had is what made you look for an advisor? What would your advice be to startups as to why they need an advisor, and what made you look for an advisor?
I think there were two reasons. One was at a certain level of scale, you want to gain from the experience of someone who's been there, done that, who's able to pattern match certain problems, right? So an advisor who has dealt with, so for example, international expansion, right? Or building out a sales team and function. I can benefit from that advice and I can, have it contextualized to the reality of the company. So that's number one. The second, which I actually think it sometimes is even more important, is at least for me as a founder, CEO, often I would operate in a vacuum. So there was no one else for me to even bounce my thoughts off. Obviously, I could, talk to my team, but to just get a neutral, objective outside perspective and somebody who could say, have you thought about it this way? Or even just maybe hold me accountable to things I said in the past. So somebody who became a sounding board, and I think probably Manu, you did that more often than you would have liked. But I think that sometimes is the part that people miss in an advisory relationship. They don't realize that it's not just about stuff there might be other ways, you could get to know how to build a sales team, etc. But I really feel for the CEO and founder, having somebody who can keep them in their own head, keep them on the ball is incredibly valuable.
But doesn't that mean that an advisor can, or did you find that it interfered with your actions, or you felt constrained because the advisor told you something? How did you react to that?
That's a very good question. So if you look at it, there's a bit of a dichotomy. An advisor doesn't formally have any control, right? It's ultimately
shouldn't have.
It's you can give me the best or worst advice on the planet. It's mine whether to accept or to make it useful or do anything with it, right? But I think what sometimes happens is some people have advisors who are too generic, right? You will just hear, once a quarter, some sort of platitudes, which are, you could probably have figured that out yourself. I think probably what worked, I'm obviously talking about the Smokescreen example. In our relationship is you had a very detailed view of the business. We spoke frequently enough that you didn't just have a 30,000-foot view of a problem. So when you advised me, invariably, there was context to it and there was detail to it. That does obviously there were numerous times we disagreed, and your "I told you so" sign came out maybe 6 months later. But that I think that's actually better. If the advisor is not challenging you, and probably vice versa, then what are you really getting out of the relationship? Are you really strengthening your decision making and thought process?
And what do you think it had as an impact on people who reported to you? Did it make you look bad or good, or it didn't matter? How do you think the people who report to you reacted to the fact that now you had somebody else coming in?
I think initially there's always apprehension, right? When they don't know, you and I had the benefit of knowing each other for years. So they wonder, is this person here to sort of look at what I'm doing? And, a good advisor will ask the hard questions, right? But I think one of the best decisions that I made was actually having you openly advise and having my team sort of flexibly be able to come to you directly as well. Because that allowed them, maybe they had a problem with something I was doing or a decision I was making, and they had the opportunity to get coaching and advice there. And I think that stood us in good stead, because even now I very often hear members of my team saying, what would Manu have kind of told me to do about that? So I think it's a good thing. But I think it definitely, the CEO has to set context. It should never become a situation where the advisor and CEO should be in more or less lockstep, right? If the CEO is saying one thing, the advisor is saying the other, someone in a management team may wonder, how to think about a problem.
And how would you have reacted? I know this is a hypothetical question. You might find it a little difficult to give an answer. How would you have reacted if you had some investors who put an advisor, some investor says, look, I think you need an advisor, you should get one. And maybe the advisor might even come in introduced by the investor.
So I think I'm very pro the role of the advisor, but I think it's a very personal relationship. While obviously in a hypothetical world, I would be happy to be introduced to somebody from the network of an investor. I would also want to understand where that advisor's bread is buttered, so to speak, right? If that investor is having, that advisor placed on a number of companies, portfolio companies, advisory board, etc., that may be fine, but it's more important that I'm able to get along with and benefit from that relationship rather than it just being a proxy for advice from the VC to me.
So you're saying the personal equation between the advisor and the founder, CEO, or whoever this is vital. Otherwise, it just won't fly, right?
Yeah, I think it's critical, and I think very often that's the personal equation. Obviously, there's another dimension to it that sometimes, and I see this a lot in technology companies, when they receive funding, they appoint advisors who have brand name and reputation just to say that this company is advised by so and so. Whether they're actually receiving much advice or not, it's more for the marketing benefit, if you will, about who's kind of helping that company, right? But for a pure relationship, yes, I think very important that it's a personal equation between the founders and the advisor.
And in your earlier conversation, I think you raised a very important point, which was that the advisor that you respect is one who gets into a certain amount of detail to try and understand the business and the people, right? It's not just the business, but it's also the people. So as against coming and giving some general information and so on. So that means you have to spend time with the advisor. How did you manage that? I mean, how did you carve out time?
I think for me, it was a priority. I guess there were certain key points, Manu, where you and I would have spoken probably 2 or 3 times a day, right? You might have been the first call I made in the morning, in fact.
Oh, no, I don't think so, because many of those calls were overseas. So
True. But I think this is a natural progression. If the founder does not see value in the advisory relationship, they won't make time. It's a back burner thing. If the relationship and advice is genuinely working, you will absolutely make time, because look at it, it's almost like a superpower where you get the ability to vet your thinking, lean on somebody else's experience. So I remember I would often call you with stuff that was completely unrelated. It may not have even been an area that you had experience with before, right? But I would call you and I would say, hey, help me figure this out. And I was making time for that because I felt that the relationship was useful. Yeah.
So in short, to summarize, you found it's important to have an outside. You were motivated yourself to find an advisor because you felt you had some gaps, and
Yeah.
maybe somebody could fill it up.
Yeah.
And
And just to add on to that, I think another point is, this is also to your personality that, you also kept me honest. Like, say we'd had a conversation on something and I said, yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to do X. And then 3 weeks later, we're chatting and you would ask me, did you do X? Right? Or if you didn't, why did you not? Right? So that also helps.
yes, the pain in the butt, so to speak.
Which is a good thing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's. I think it's. I also feel that. I mean, having been a CEO myself, that there are times there's no one you can turn to for advice. Sometimes board members can play the role, and they have in my case. But I always found it helpful to get somebody who's unbiased and but still understands business. You see, I mean, it's one thing if they may be unbiased, but they still understand what business dynamics give you advice. And I think it's a fine line between giving advice and, from an advisor's point of view, at least I found it a fine line. You give advice and it's ignored or it's not taken. Obviously, after a while, I guess the advisor would feel, okay, what am I wasting my time for, right? So there has to be a balance between advice given and taken. Not 100%, obviously, never. But, and the personal equation that drives a relationship with the advisor. Okay. Anything else you want to add? You think?
Yeah, I was going to throw a question back at you, right? So oftentimes, how does it work in the mind of the advisor when you have a problem where there's a solution? You've probably done it 25 times before, right? Maybe the company or the CEO is not seeing it that way, right? How did you in the Smokescreen situation find that balance between, because you had access even to the team, right? But that balance between jumping in and saying, hey guys, shake you awake, you have to do it this way, versus saying, I'm going to solve the problem. Because I think one of the things we did, which was a good balance, was where there were areas which, and typically I guess most advisors wouldn't even do this, where there were areas where I really just thought you had that locked down. We used to do projects, right? Like I remember opening the US office and the arm's length relationship, etc. I mean, I was clueless. It would have taken me 3 months just to understand the nuance. So that was, I literally said, Manu, project, can you just do that for me, right? But how did you view that from the lens of an advisor? Because that went from advice to actually operational.
Yeah, and I think that's perhaps will vary from advisor to advisor. I guess my inclination is always to do, look, it's obvious you need to do it, and so on and so forth. But I have to remind myself I'm an advisor and not the doer. So if I put on the hat of a doer sometimes, it's only with the permission or the request of the advisee, so to speak. Because otherwise, it's all too easy for someone who's been an entrepreneur and used to, come on, guys, get this done. Who sort of become overbearing and then become a nuisance as against an asset and become a liability. So that was always on my mind. And so when I saw certain things you were not doing, I'm doing advising other companies, I've learned to be patient, and go again, raise the topic again and again, and hopefully sometime. Well, clearly, if after 2 years of 1 year of raising the topic, nothing happens, then you probably wash your hands and say, look, this is not for me.
Yeah.
But otherwise, you have to make sure you don't, how do you become directive? It's very difficult for, at least I find it sometimes difficult for an entrepreneur, though now as I've grown older, I'm less worried about not doing.
And I had one more, which I think is always good for founders to understand the motivations of anyone they work with, right? What is it that would keep you excited about, say when you were advising Smokescreen, like what got you out of bed in the morning to also put in the time, right? Because I think that's important. If you mentioned one that the advisor has to feel the advice is taken, but were there more drivers?
At least at some time, we have added value. I mean, I think it's what motivates an advisor like me is the excitement and the fact that you are making a difference and you feel you're making a difference. And there's a rapport and there is dialogue and you're learning. The fact that while, you may have done it before, there may be a slight twist or something that you have to do differently, which gets you there faster, which you didn't know about or you hadn't tried. So I think that makes a big difference and keeps me as an advisor motivated. And the very fact that you get to learn about the industry, like I knew zero about security software. So I learned something and that made a difference to me, and I continue to learn right till the end. So I knew nothing about deception. Now I know something about deception. Not enough, I guess.
I hope you're speaking about the technology and not the concept.
Yes, it's both, because the technology arose from the concept, right?
Yeah.
So if you found different ways to deceive people, maybe you can build it into the technology. Okay. Well, I think we have had a nice session. I've enjoyed it. I hope you did too, and I hope we brought some value to entrepreneurs who take the time to look at it.
And thanks for having me. And I know Manu will never give himself a shout out, but for anyone who's listening, I would highly recommend you look at an advisor like Manu. Is exceptionally helpful to me. So unsolicited shout out for Manu, since he'll be too humble about what he did for Smokescreen and me.
Okay, thanks a lot for the kind words, Syed. Very kind of you. Thank you.
Lovely chatting, Manu.
Lovely chatting. Bye.
Bye.